Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Michael Wald, and thank you very much for joining me during what I hope you will find is a very practical and informative discussion of your health, and specifically in the area of longevity, living longer, but also living longer during what's known as the non-disability stage of life, so you can do what it is you want to do. I'm the founder of the Blooddetective method, which is a way of approaching one's health that is holistic. And I know that doesn't tell us a whole bunch right now, but just hang in there and we're going to compare and contrast the Blooddetective method to the Blueprint method. I'll first begin with a brief disclaimer that this information is not a substitute for sound medical and health advice. It's merely meant to educate you. So please be careful how you use this information. So the reason I decided to do this presentation on longevity is because of Bryan Johnson's Netflix special, where it is a documentary type special during which he is literally sharing with the world his various longevity and health technologies, techniques, and effort. He's currently 47 years old, and this is a photo of him in the center, the black and white one, and you can see he's in phenomenal physical shape. And I am the gentleman on the right and left to him in the color, and I am 59 years old. Well, I'll be 59 years old in about a week, and I just took those photos just recently to show you that I believe that Bryan Johnson is onto something, and I certainly resonate with much of what he said during his talk. And during this conversation, there's several bullet points that deserve some attention that he mentioned, that if you understand them, you yourself might even live longer. So first, let's start with a conversation on the Blueprint method, which is Bryan's method. He is an entrepreneur billionaire. You probably have heard of him, otherwise you might not have been listening to this talk. And then there is me, the founder of the Blooddetective method. I'm going to begin with some basic concepts that Bryan and I actually have in common. For example, he states, correctly so, that various regulatory agencies are not really health focused, and they include the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, the Center of Disease Control, the National Institutes of Health, the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, and there are others as well. And what I mean by them not being healthcare focused is that they spend most of their time regulating medicine. And medicine is thought to be, by some people, or at least we call it, a healthcare system. But I and Bryan believe that it is a disease care system. And we need disease care, but we lose something when we don't focus on actual healthcare. And more about that later. I probably should also mention that I've never met Bryan. I don't know anything else about him other than I carefully watched his special and did some surfing on the web to find out more about what he was up to. And then there are various medical and clinical trials. You'll have heard during the Netflix specials, there was one particular doctor who mentioned how he feels that double-blind, placebo-controlled trials are the only way to go, and that's what medicine's based on. But Bryan and I believe, from what I can tell from watching his Netflix special, we're both focused on a health span increase and a lifespan increase. And the way to get at that partly is that we need to experiment on ourselves and compare ourselves against ourselves. And medicine doesn't like that. Medicine likes large clinical trials. And again, I'm going to reiterate this point later, but it should occur to you as strange that if there's a study, let's say, of 200 women or 200 men, for that matter, and let's say they give a sugar pill, which is the placebo that's not supposed to do anything, compared to, let's say, a drug or a nutrient that you want to know if it works. You get some results, and then they'll say, well, the average man or average woman responded in this way. And that's useful, but there is no such thing as an average man or an average woman. So why wouldn't we want to compare ourselves over time to ourselves during our health efforts in terms of looking at our blood chemistries and other measurable factors? Of course we would. We both, Bryan and myself, believe in the use of nutritional supplements, and a lot of them. Some of you are thinking, well, you know, nutritional supplements, they're a waste of money, they create expensive urine, as it has been said, but those conversations are nonsensical. All one needs to do is go on the Cochrane database of scientific research or the National Library of Medicine at pubmed.gov and just plug in what it is you want to find out. And you'll find that there are tens of thousands of studies, maybe even more than that, on the use of nutritional supplements in all sorts of longevity and disease areas. And then there are various laboratory tests, which most doctors don't use. Doctors tend to stay within their specialties in terms of the tests that they do. They rarely talk with one another. There's lack of correlation of care. So Bryan and I believe that it is up to the consumer, the healthcare consumer, you and me, to put this all together. That's just a fact. We may not like that our so-called healthcare system is built that way, but it is. And it was also made mention that Bryan is trying to make money off of his longevity efforts, and he does have various products. And I would say, great, so what? I personally do have a product line of Blooddetective supplements, although I do not sell them to anyone other than my clients. If I can make supplements what I think are better and cheaper, then I do that. But I always still use other nutritional products from other companies if I feel that their products are superior to mine. And I'm sure that Bryan does that as well. And again, I don't know him personally. This is just my impression. And if I use my life coaching skills on really examining him, I think that he is sincere. So let's go through some of the features of the Blooddetective longevity approach compared to the blueprint approach that is Bryan's. First of all, we both agree that we are working within a broken medical system. It is a disease care system, which in part means that it waits for the anvil to fall, for the disease to happen, and then it reacts. And when it reacts, it generally reacts with symptom-suppressing medications. And there is not, in my opinion at least, and I think that Bryan would agree with this too, but I cannot speak for him personally, that doctors are inadequately trained in other areas of medicine. They do not see the full picture, and they wait for the disease to happen, and then they symptomatically treat it with medications. Physicians have very little healthcare training. And how do I know that? I went to medical school. And again, more about my credentials in a moment. And also, Bryan and I incorporate various technologies like laboratory tests and other biotechnologies against ourselves over time as we try different things to see if they work. And I certainly use these sorts of techniques on my clients. I'm sure that Bryan is examined on a regular basis by the doctor or doctors that he's working with and other people that he's working with, and I certainly believe that that is correct. So both the Blooddetective and blueprint methods have a lot in common thus far. And both of our methods use laboratory tests and what are in particular called biomarkers. Biomarkers are simply tests that not only let you know what's happening now in the area that you're testing, but they have a correlation between how long one lives and how well one lives. So you want to have a baseline of various biomarker tests. Usually they are chosen based on the individual needs of the client. And then there's physical examination. So as a doctor of chiropractic, I do physical examinations. I can do neuro-ortho examinations. I can listen to a person's heart and lungs. I could do EKGs. All the standard things are done. And I also go further and do a visual nutritional examination. So for example, if I see a crease on one's earlobe, that may be a very strong prognostic indicator of cardiovascular disease. If I see that someone has, let's say, bumps on the back of their triceps and back of their arms, this may be a zinc or a protein deficiency or essential fatty acid deficiency or even a low thyroid issue. If someone has a large belly, obviously that means in part that they are increased risk of cardiovascular disease and other diseases. And let's see, if we had a woman with a large hip to waist ratio, there's an increased risk of ovarian cancer, for example. So looking at a person, just looking at them with a person with my training sees quite a lot. I don't know if the blueprint method does that, but it is integral to the Blooddetective approach. And then there's another area of agreement where Bryan and I will be focusing on tailoring what we do for our own bodies as well as our clients. And then using various data points like how a blood glucose level has changed, let's say for the better or for the worse, and correlating that with sometimes dozens, if not hundreds of other data points. We also agree that stress management, sleep hygiene is essential for any healing process. There is no healing unless one is resting and sleeping. Now, just saying that may not give you full information because there are detailed techniques for improving sleep, detailed techniques for enhancing, let's say, muscle strength and reflexes and coordination, for example. So you want to take each of these bullets seriously. Also, Bryan and my approach is geared towards delaying the onset or hopefully preventing various diseases that are killing most people, like cancer, heart disease, autoimmune diseases. And again, I'll reiterate, as I will reiterate some points, because this is complex. I might seem like I am focusing on the same thing more than once. But for example, when I say we want to use biomarker tests, and I know I've said that a few times before, I'm trying to drill into your brain there that biomarker tests are essential. If you just go by how you're feeling, you could feel fine. I've had clients that feel great and then just strangely and shockingly, they're riddled with metastatic cancer. So we can't use how we're feeling. You want to use objective biomarker tests. Both the blueprint method and the blood detective method, again, seem to be focused towards delaying the onset of diseases, towards hopefully expanding lifespan, and using these biomarker tests, and ultimately giving nutritional suggestions in the form of the optimal foods for that person's chemistry and the nutritional supplements. And for those of you thinking, well, do we really need to take nutritional supplements? The answer is yes, because nutritional supplements, among other advantages, help us guarantee specific dosages of certain types of nutrients that we want to focus on. And even though we might be eating a diet that has foods which are supposedly rich according to textbooks in, let's say, magnesium or vitamin C, that doesn't mean that they are. And even if they are, they may have levels that are far, far too low for longevity purposes. So once again, we have two approaches here. We have the blueprint longevity approach by Bryan Johnson, and we have the blood detective approach by little old me right here. And here are some interesting things that Bryan said on his Netflix special that I wanted to go over with you. Number one, he says that living 100 years for him, and I'm paraphrasing Bryan, it will not be enough. And that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with setting high goals. If you set a goal here, you might make it here. But if you set a goal here, you might make it there, or maybe even there. So who knows how realistic this is? This is an experiment. Bryan's the first one to admit that, and I agree 100%. And then he says that, aging can be reversed or slowed. Now, if I said that 10 years ago, there would be a problem in the scientific community with that statement, but not anymore. We know that these biomarkers, which represent aging, can be reversed more or less and to different extents in different people. So those are proof that we can reverse and mitigate and adjust various areas of our physiology. That's what the biomarker tests do, which are associated, when they're improved, with a younger physiology, with a younger body. Bryan also says that he spends approximately $2 million a year to advance his own health efforts for his personal health. And that's fantastic that he can do that. Well, I do not spend $2 million a year on my own health, but I've overcome a topical skin lymphoma condition. I've overcome a multiple sclerosis diagnosis, that autoimmune disease, when I was age about 18. So, and I have been practicing these types of nutritional and longevity efforts ever since then, because my father was a chiropractor and nutritionist, and really inspired me in health. It just excited me from a very, very young age. I'm not sure that Bryan began his efforts nearly as early as mine, which began at age 18. And when I work with clients in the real world, no one can afford $2 million. So I found other ways, just being smart about this, where it doesn't have to cost nearly that much. And then there's his obsession with his progress in the area of longevity. And some people might, deem him as mentally unstable. Now, whether or not he's got some personality disorder or histrionic personality disorder or narcissism, I don't think it matters, because those personality characteristics often can drive a people to do things in their fields of interest. Wherever you point these people to, man, they can really, really be productive. So, yeah, I'm not making any personal judgments from him. My observation, though, is that he could be bipolar. He might have some depression. He tends to go from high moods to low moods. And there's some other aspects of his behavior that I observed watching the Netflix show that might suggest that he's got some issues mentally, but who doesn't? Okay? And then he stresses healthcare versus disease care, which I've mentioned a few times. If you're not focusing on your health, folks, no one else is going to. So this is up to you. It's your responsibility. It's not the responsibility of the medical system. And if you don't like how the medical system is working, well, find practitioners that are working on the outskirts of medicine that practice this sort of longevity and anti-aging techniques. And he says, like I do, that the so-called healthcare system we have is really a disease care system which treats symptoms with medications. This is obviously true. And Bryan Johnson, the founder of the Blueprint approach, launched in October 2021, according to the web. And basically, he says that he is the most tested person, the most measured person in history. That's not true. In fact, everything he's doing, everything that I can see, is nothing new at all. He just has the financial resources to have put it in the faces of Americans and those outside of the United States. I assume that his show on Netflix is reaching various corners of the earth. But persons in my field and my personal health endeavors had begun, like I mentioned, when I was around 16 years old. So I doubt he's more measured than I am, but it's not really a contest. The point is that measurements are important. And both of our focuses in terms of the Blueprint and Blood Detective are basically, as I've said, focus on health, focus on longevity. They provide guidance and modifications in in what you're eating, nutritional supplements you're taking, how you're dealing with stress and sleep, and all that sort of thing. And it is structured, meaning a person's day has to include specific ways in which we act for the purpose of health. So someone might say, and I hear this all the time in my clinic, people will say, well, Dr. Wald, I don't want to change everything in my life. You don't have to change everything in your life. But whatever it is you're willing to change, we want to do that correctly, and we want to structure it into your daily routine so it gets done. Because for health enhancement and longevity enhancement to happen, in my opinion, and this is something I'm sure Bryan Johnson agrees, it must be done regularly and without fail. So its benefits are super additive over time. So let's jump now a little bit into comparing the Blood Detective method, my method, against Bryan's Blueprint method. Again, the same photo I showed earlier on. Bryan is 47 years old now. I'm not exactly sure when this photo was taken. As I mentioned, I just took it off the web. But I'm going to guess it's probably pretty recent. Let's say at minimum, he might have been 45 when he took that photo. This photo of me, or both the photos, the color photos there, I literally just took those a few days ago. I am not technically 59 at the time of this PowerPoint presentation, but I will be on February 9th, just a few days away. And I think, excuse me, you can see that, we're both in very good physical shape, and I can assure you our biochemistry is also in great shape. But I am 12 years older, roughly, than Bryan Johnson, and I think that my longevity efforts are showing. So let's backtrack just for a minute to let you know who it is you're talking to. That's me, Dr. Michael Wald, the Blood Detective. So I founded the term Blood Detective when a grateful client said to me after years of misdiagnoses, and I found the diagnosis and helped her, she said, you're like a blood detective. So, of course, I trademarked that term, and I took that on, the Blood Detective sort of branding, as my call to action. I originally went to chiropractic college, then became a dietitian. I earned my master's degree in human nutrition. I have a board certification in nutrition. I went to medical school. I did graduate, but I decided not to go into medicine. And you'll notice during my on the list of credentials here whether or not also my degrees and certifications are accredited or not. I do not value my non-accredited education any as superior to my accredited education. For example, I have a PhD in philosophy from an unaccredited institution that's no longer in existence. But I remember reading something like 80 books for that. And I didn't read that many books, earning my dietitian's license. And then I am a fitness nutrition specialist, a life coach. I'm also trained and have passed my national acupuncture examination. As I mentioned, I have a PhD degree in holistic philosophy, and I've written many different books, including a 500-page textbook on anti-aging laboratory tests. So Bryan doesn't have any of these credentials. I doubt that any of the physicians that he works with have all of these credentials either, which simply means I just bring more to the table. And the fact that all of these are in my brain enhances the concierge type of approach that I have with people. So I might be with a person who says, you know, Dr. Wald, I tried to follow your diet. I tried to take your supplements. I just can't do it. So my life coaching skills come in and I say, well, why do you think that is? And through a process of questioning and rational thinking, we simply might find that all we needed to do was set a Google alarm to remind us to do something. Or maybe it's something deeper. I had one client say to me, Dr. Wald, I can't take these vitamins. I said, why not? She says, well, my mother had cancer and she was taking all these vitamins and she died anyway. And I, of course, was very sad to hear that. And during my response, I mentioned that she's not her mother. She doesn't have cancer. And this is so we can hopefully close the gap and prevent her from getting cancer, or at least reduce her risk. But these are my credentials, and I've spent my life gathering them. And there are others too. And they allow me a certain perspective, which is a very wide perspective. Let's move on. So as I mentioned, I'm the founder and creator of the Blood Detective software. So the software allows a practitioner to put in hundreds, well, maybe not hundreds, about 170 or so different lab tests, and then the logic of the computer program will medically and nutritionally interpret the nutritional meaning of the labs. It also does something I'm going to mention a couple of times during this talk, is that the Blood Detective method, unlike the Blueprint method, which doesn't have this to my knowledge, compares your results not just to men or women in your age category, in a range, like your cholesterol range, your blood sugar range. We've all seen this, we've all had laboratory tests. But there are different ranges that are set differently, which are oriented towards health and longevity, not merely detecting disease. So if you want to learn more about that, if you go to my website at www.drmichaelwald.com and search for the Blood Detective, you'll see a description of how it works. But basically, you're compared to healthy people, not just average people. I don't know if Bryan has any system like that. In addition, I want to emphasize that my Blood Detective technology came about roughly in 2005, and the Blueprint was founded in 2021. So my software alone has many, many more years of information being put into it, against which I can compare how you or anyone else compares to all of that information I've gathered in the software, and it allows a certain amount of expertise and a certain amount of confidence in the recommendations. Because, over years, different nutrients, different foods, different diets, fasts, health approaches, medications, they're in and out, and then you forget them. But if there was anything to them scientifically, they're in my system, and I can never forget them because they're there. And my system is based on the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, when I was 18 years old, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, so I was heavily motivated to improve my own health. And that's where this all sort of came about in terms of the Blood Detective concepts, which is focused on reversing biomarkers of aging like cholesterol and C-reactive protein and homocysteine and ferritin and vitamin C levels, things like that. And there are more. We'll talk about that as well in a few moments. And like the blueprint system, the blood detective system provides detailed exercise, dietary, stress management, sleep, and other types of very personalized suggestions based upon a full workup of an individual. I, unlike Bryan, do not like to focus on medications as part of the longevity plan because, in my experience, most of them turn out not to be true and they have their side effects and their issues. But it is an individual process of determining whether or not a medication is the thing to do. So I'm not anti-medication, and I do not and I cannot prescribe medication, but I do work with doctors that are willing to prescribe medications if I feel that is important. If one cannot achieve what you're trying to achieve through nutrition and diet, then maybe medication. And then if I do choose medication for a client or suggest that they speak with their prescribing doctors to perhaps use a lower dose of that medication and less frequently. So for example, many people with high cholesterol, if they cannot lower their cholesterol through reducing their stress, by getting better sleep, by improving their diets, for example, exercising obviously, then considering a statin drug is not unreasonable. But rather than recommending a starting dose of 40 milligrams, I might suggest to the doctor who is prescribing for my clients that they consider 5 milligrams every other day. And I have found over the years that that works just fine, obviously reducing the potential for very serious side effects from the use of statin drugs. So again, medication should be a second choice, not the first choice. And you can see here on the slide that what my credentials are in bullet number 1, some of them. The fact that my software, which I use, was developed over 20 years ago, how it compares your laboratory work to average individuals your age that are male or female, as well as comparing you to healthy people. And, excuse me, the concept of recommended daily allowances. The RDAs, or recommended daily allowances, are governmental guidelines which describe the minimum amount of a given nutrient. Maybe it's a macronutrient like proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, or micronutrients like minerals like zinc, and what those doses should be to prevent a deficiency disease or deficiency signs. If you had your doctor look at, let's say, your vitamins, they'll look at the bottle, they look at it, and they say, you have levels here of vitamin C that are thousands of times higher than the recommended daily ounces. A waste of time. They do not know, because they didn't learn much nutrition in medical school, that the RDAs are the minimum amount. So just because you're taking 1,000 times higher than a minimum amount doesn't mean that that amount is not what you actually need. Okay? And then foods are recommended based upon the biochemistry of my clients, what their health goals are, and as compared and contrasted to the blueprint method, which I believe is entirely plant-based. I have nothing wrong with that. There's obviously a good deal of scientific evidence that shows that a plant-based diet has many, many advantages in some people, but many people do it wrong. Many people need higher levels of nutrients that a plant-based diet can give them. So I do not, in contrast to the blueprint model, unless I'm misunderstanding it, do not put all of my clients on a plant-based diet. And if I do, I might have to adjust it further. Let's say I find out that my clients are deficient in 2 different nutrients. I might have a plant-based diet that has plant-based foods that are much higher in those nutrients as part of that diet. Or I might give nutritional supplements. Or some people might say to me, Dr. Wald, I don't want to have a plant-based diet my whole life. I don't want to restrict myself that way, even if it means a few years off of my life. And if that's what they're saying, and I can't convince them to begin a diet that's a bit more rigid, but might be better and more conducive for longevity, I do the best job I can with including meat, obviously from free-range sources, and fortifying it with nutrition. And then if an individual also has a gluten problem, or maybe they're diabetic, or they have hypertension, or they might have cancer, or some autoimmune disease, or cardiovascular disease, neurologic disease, gut disease, you name it, then maybe a plant-based diet is not the right diet. Here's just another picture of me showing off. This is my almost 58-year-old body. Again, I took this photo just a handful of days ago, and my birthday is coming up February 9th. And that's about a week from now. And this is the result of years of longevity focus. I feel amazing, have a little bit of aches and pains here and there, a little joint stuff, but doesn't prevent me from practicing karate. It does not prevent me from running, hiking, all the things that I love to do. So let's talk about some of these biomarkers that I keep mentioning. Basically, biomarkers are tests that help us manage prevention of disease, as well as showing us whether or not a person's chemistry is improving to the point where they might even live longer and better. And the Blood Detective program could incorporate, as I said earlier, about 170 different biomarker tests. I do not know how many biomarker tests Bryan uses, but I'm sure it's around that range. He's an intelligent man. And then there's also using these average to clinical and healthy blood ranges I've been talking about. Using tests, biomarkers like microscopic work, looking at the function of cells. Sometimes you can see problems that the laboratory tests that you and I are used to getting, which are based on numbers, where the quantitative numbers approach doesn't show what the cell's functionality or lack of functionality is under a microscope. So I do both. And then there's a biotechnology or biomarker test known as cardiobeam testing. I don't know if Bryan uses this particular type of testing, but it is an FDA-approved type of test that can tell me a person's biological age, like how old in years is their cardiovascular system within minutes. And then you have this baseline. Let's say your cardiovascular system is 10 years older than you, because the cardiobeam test will tell me that. It also tells me many other things about the lab. And then when you take your fish oil or you do your exercise or you eat a certain way, as Bryan and I say, we want to and need to see these biomarker tests trending towards very healthy or even optimal values. So what do I mean by optimal values? So here's an example, and this is really important because you probably are not going to see this again. I do not know if Bryan's doctors and other health professionals that he's working with are educated in this area. But for example, look at total cholesterol at the top. So we have a clinical range of 125 to 200. That is the range that most doctors say is reasonable and what they're used to comparing you to, and what you will find on your on your regular blood work. Now, the blood detective method, if you look at the optimal range to the far right, it says that the optimal range of cholesterol is much more tightly controlled, as I mentioned earlier, between 150 and 180. So if you're not in there, you're not in the optimal range with a statistically lower risk of cardiovascular disease. But your doctor, on the other hand, goes by these clinical ranges and says, well, if you're 199, you're fine. If you're 200, you're fine. If you're 210, 215, your doctor might say, well, that's pretty good. It's close. It's a complete misread of the labs. First of all, there's a bell curve. Okay, there's a bell curve. Are you seeing this? Sorry, there's the bell curve. And 95% of people are here, and then there's 2.5% this direction, 2.5% this direction, but most of the population is in the center. So the bell curve for cholesterol will be somewhere in the center, not way out to the right or way out to the left, but much more closer to these optimal ranges. So you could actually have your doctor say, when your cholesterol, let's say, is 185, okay, and your doctor will say, well, it's fine because it's within the 125 to 200 range, and they are technically correct. But I would say, as a blood detective, 150 to 180 or 185, okay, so we need to start to look at your cardiovascular risk because you're 185 and the upper end of acceptable for the optimal range is 180. Make sense? Let me give you one more example. And there's hundreds of these examples. Now, I did not make up all of these optimal ranges. Over the course of years, I determined through my own clients, thousands of patients, where the optimal ranges were. But then when I did research into the various areas of medicine, for example, endocrinology, there was an article several years back that said if you have a normal blood glucose, just your blood sugar, normal blood sugar of, let's say, 95, that's greater than 85. And this article said if you're greater than 85, you might be pre-diabetic even though you're in the normal range. So that's an example of my blood detective concepts starting to permeate into medicine or independently being developed by different researchers. So if we want to prevent disease and live longer and better, my common sense tells me we want to practice and monitor ourselves in the optimal ranges. I'll give you another example. There's LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, right? And HDL, you can think of H as happy, and the other one is L, so that's low or bad cholesterol, LDL. Most laboratories now even put it on paper what your clinical result is, and they'll say normal result in the normal range. And then, so for LDL, they'll say if you're 130 milligrams per deciliter, you have a normal result. But if you're 100 or less, it's actually labeled as an optimal result. So doctors are starting to think, oh, there's acceptable, but then there's longevity, and there are diseases that if we can get a person's chemistry into those disease ranges, into these optimal ranges, the health ranges, I should say, then they should live longer and better. Hemoglobin A1C, the one towards the third one from the bottom, that's a 2-month or so average of your blood sugar. And it says that if you are 5.7, then you have a normal, and then you'd be pre-diabetic between 5.7 and 6.4. So the optimal range is something like 5.2. And we know that even that little bit of difference between 5.2 and 5.7 is dramatic in terms of lifespan, cardiovascular risk, inflammatory issues. So as the blood detective and as the person who has popularized these optimal ranges, this is something quite unique, and I do not believe that Bryan's people are using this. And if they are and you're watching this, I would really like to know, and I'll make, of course, a correction, because I like most of what you're doing, Bryan. Some other biomarkers, I won't go over all of them, but some, for example, bone density. I check my bone density often. But I wouldn't do that with a regular DEXA scan in medicine because the DEXA scan's radiation. The bone density that I use is ultrasound. So it's just sound waves bouncing off of the bone, and they bounce off in a certain way based upon the density of the bone, and then they calculate the bone density. And I can do that as often as I'd like because the sound waves can't hurt the body. So you can't even really, well, perhaps you shouldn't even try to do a longevity, let's say health endeavor, and use DEXA scanning as one of the biomarkers. And then there's body composition. This is something that I know that Bryan uses based on the Netflix series, and I certainly use, where we have a measurement of lean body mass, percentage of muscle, water, fat, metabolic rate, something called phase angle, which is a test of the energetic potential, I should say energetic balance or imbalance of cells, lung function, EKGs. All of these are important biomarkers. But how many of your regular doctors are doing these? Almost none of them. And these next ones are common tests in medicine that can be read medically, clinically, and read based on optimal blood detective ranges. So, for example, we already talked about cholesterol, the last one on the list here. There's optimal ranges and there's acceptable ranges. But all of these tests here, and you can, of course, spend time going over them. And I may also just discuss each one of them in a upcoming podcast so you can know a bit more about them. But these are tests that I do on many of my clients. I just thought I'd throw in a picture there of what some red blood cells in a person with extreme inflammation look like. These, what look like stacks of coins, they call that, the French term for that is rouleau formation. And that is a term used in hematology. And it means a lot of inflammation and red blood cells sticking together. And when they stick together, piling up on top of each other, they're losing all that surface area for oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange. And this is just another list of important biomarkers. Perhaps I'll point out that hemoglobin A1C, the second one on this page, very important. Homocysteine down the line, they're extremely important. I mean, these are all important as far as I'm concerned, but what we tend to do with clients is I determine what biomarkers I think are the most essential ones, and based upon the results of those, that'll tell me which other ones I should do and in what order. Oh, here I am with my shirt off. But I wanted to be consistent with the blueprint method to show you that the things that I'm telling you now, I've been doing on myself for many years. You might be saying, well, it's too late for me because I'm as old as you, Dr. Wald, or older, and I haven't done this, so is it a waste of my time to try to even start? No, it's not a waste of your time, but you should see what is possible when you start these things earlier. More biomarkers. Vitamin D is a particularly important biomarker. For example, and this could save your life in a sense. Most doctors will say to you, if you're at least a 30 on the range of vitamin D3 on a blood test, then you're fine. You're 31, 35, 40. I've seen doctors literally say, that's fine, do nothing. They don't do much unless you're 29. And then if you're 29 or lower on a blood test for vitamin D3, you're supposed to be recommended a prescription level of D3, 50,000 units. Unless you're morbidly obese, then something like 100,000 units once a week for several weeks, and then your labs are checked again. These higher doses work much better and faster than smaller doses over time. But most doctors get it wrong. They do the vitamin D3, you're low, and they say, take some vitamin D. They don't even give you a dose. That's the most common error that I see. Then some smarter doctors will say, you're low in vitamin D, take 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000. So we need to do the right tests on the right person and give the right way of dosing for that individual. And we have to follow it up by saying, okay, I want you to take this vitamin D for this period of time, and then we're going to check it again. How many times have your doctors asked you to come in to check things again and followed up with you? Sure, there are some that do that, but as a structured way of building your health, it's just not done in our disease care system. More tests, more biomarkers. I might make mention of thyroid testing. The standard thyroid tests, even in a person with a low thyroid function, what's called hypothyroidism, are generally normal until they've lost about 30 to 40% of their thyroid function. Then the test shows a little bit of something out. Then the doctor says, oh, it's just slightly out. No, it's not how to read the tests. Not how to read the tests at all. And I know this, that many different types of doctors and health professionals that have licensed to order and read labs are not particularly good at reading labs. Again, more biomarkers. So biomarkers are closely tied to essential nutrients and phytonutrients, which are plant nutrition, offering actionable insights to improve health through targeted nutrition. So you do the biomarkers. Cholesterol means these nutritional associations, magnesium. If that's low, you take magnesium. If your C-reactive protein is elevated and you don't have an infection, sometimes lipoic acid, vitamin E, vitamin C, and antioxidants can help lower that. You put all these together, you have a plan of action, food, supplements, lifestyle, all of it, and then you check the biomarkers so you can sleep at night and know that, wow, I actually know that what I'm doing, taking these supplements, eating these foods, is actually working, because that's a common area of confusion for many of my clients. They say to me, Dr. Well, I don't know if what I'm doing is working. And they're smart to think that, because most of the time, in my experience, things are not working. So in summary, I believe that a concierge approach where, for example, I see relatively few clients, but I focus on them very heavily in structured ways, building their education, doing the biomarker tests in all these different areas, maintaining a holistically minded approach so that nothing's not fair game. If it's stress, fine, let's deal with that. If it's sleep problems, let's deal with that. If it's emotional issues, nutritional issues, disease issues, we deal with all that. And I do not focus merely on recommended daily allowances of nutrients. Often the nutritional supplements and or nutritional or nutrient levels that I recommend are much higher than the recommended daily allowances. And those are called orthomolecular doses, which is optimal dose. And then the various nutritional tests and biomarkers and testing I'd like to emphasize from multiple areas of medicine at one time. So even if you would try to do this the super cheap way, see your regular doctors, go to different types of doctors, try to figure out what they say, they will not all talk. Now, if you have some serious medical condition, they would be forced to talk. But most of the time, and just look at your own experience, your different types of doctors are not speaking to one another. And then ultimately, as I keep reiterating, giving actionable steps that you can take on a daily basis, emphasizing that the recommendations have to be relatively doable. I meet people where they are in terms of their capabilities, and then we bring them up slowly, showing that they're doing more and more, they're becoming better and better at this, and there you go. So this has been a conversation comparing the blood detective method by Dr. Michael Wald, that's me, with Bryan's method, the billionaire entrepreneur who currently has a show called Please Don't Die on Netflix. I must say, Bryan, that I think you're doing a wonderful thing. You seem like a good person. And once again, thank you everyone for tuning in to this particular episode. My name is Dr. Michael Wald. You can send me your show ideas and comments about this or any other podcast that I do on to info@blooddetective.com. And certainly go to my website at drmichaelwald.com, search the blog section or just the search bar that's there. There's tons of free content. Thank you so much. See you soon.